Hello, everybody. All right, so I'm Cybele Higgins, and I teach English as a second language here at Lane. My sabbatical project is called Environmental Activism, Law, and Language. Oh, that picture there was taken in Antigua, Guatemala. So background of my project, basically I had this dream that originated about 10 years ago. I'm a supporter of the Environmental Law Alliance Worldwide. It's also called ELA for short. And I was attending one of their after parties after the annual meeting. ELA is an organization that supports environmental attorneys around the world to do their jobs more effectively and efficiently, and helps them advocate for environmental law in the face of adversity, and helps support them with case law and things like that. So I'm honored to even be in the presence of some of these lawyers, trailblazers, brave people, sometimes facing persecution in different countries. So about 10 years ago, I was at one of the after parties after the annual meeting. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't attend the meetings. I just like to kind of try to rub shoulders with some of these amazing attorneys. And a friend of mine, English speaker, who was interning at ELA, came running up to me, said, "Cybele, you speak Spanish, right?" And he had helped provide some case law to one of the attorneys who was visiting, a Spanish speaker. And the attorney wanted help interpreting. She just wanted to thank him for his help and give him a little gift from Guatemala. So I did my little interpreting, and it was pretty easy for me. I'm used to medical interpreting and things like that. But that got me thinking, these environmental attorneys, they are working in their expertise internationally all the time. And they're collaborating across countries, across languages. English is the biggest language tool. It's, English has its colonial legacy. It's an oppressor language, but it's also claimed as an international language tool. And I was just wondering about that. Some of these attorneys that are experts in their field, what do they do? How can they get more English to do their jobs more effectively and efficiently? So that was the birth of my sabbatical project. I went in 2019, I went to ELA, talked with the Associate Executive Director, Lori Maddox, and told her my idea. And she's like, yes. So she also told me more. I gave her my hypothetical list of some of the needs that I thought some of the attorneys might have. And she said, yes, all and more. And then she told me that they have from around the world do fellowships at ELA here in Eugene. And the ones that arrive with less English go to American English Institute at the University of Oregon. They have an agreement there. A lot of them test in really low. And so they're actually learning really basic rudimentary English or intermediate English. They're never actually able to apply it to their expertise, to their jobs at the time. So that was like kind of that's the reason I'm looking at English to apply now in their jobs. So Lori sent out a blurb about me, my bio, what I wanted to do to partner agencies around the world. Got a lot of hits from Latin America, Africa. The first ones to reply was, as you can see on your screen, Alianza de Derecho Ambiental y de Agua. So I'm going to be saying ADA dos. That's what they call their organization, is ADA dos. So this is an environmental attorney and scientist NGO. They were the first ones to respond. So I decided to go there. And turns out the main person I was working with was the attorney I had interpreted for 10 years ago. Yeah. So purposes and objectives. So all these pictures were taken during my sabbatical. Those are turtles. Little baby turtles. So I had three main purposes for the sabbatical project. One was to have an academic language immersion experience for myself. It's been a while. I speak languages. I've lived in different cultures and countries, and it had been a while since I had an actual immersion experience myself. And I've been teaching at Lane since 1996, and I felt like it was about time for me to feel what my students are feeling again. And the second, which is like the biggest part, was the environmental attorney and scientist English language needs assessment, which I did with Ada Dos. And the last was the local and international community connection, and that's connecting with Lane and some of our core values. So I'm going to talk about the methods and processes for these three. So before we get into this, this is day one. From Antigua, from Oregon, Eugene to Antigua, Guatemala. Actually, it turned out to be days 1 and 2 with weather layovers and the Salt Lake City airport carpet in 48 hours in a K-95. Arriving in Guatemala, I expected this. I expected Escher. I expected that because I've had the cultural confusion, I've had the culture shock, I've had the language ups and downs, and I was waiting for it. And it happened. And I was able to document it in a journal. So both language and culture, you can look at my sabbatical report for more talk about that. So this is going to describe my process. So for the my actual language learning for myself, I really wanted to focus on academic Spanish, but not just blanket academic Spanish. I wanted to focus on Spanish for environmental law purposes, because that was my interest, that's my focus, and that's what I was going to be using it for. I also researched best practices for adult language learners. Basically, purpose drives people's learning. You can't, without purpose, there is no place in the brain for that to really land for adults. I found a teacher. It took me about 6 months of emailing, and then after I got on the ground searching, I found a teacher who was studying to be an attorney, and one of her interests was environmental law. So I pretty much lucked out there. Oh, I have to go. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the language learning. So I took individual classes with her in her law office, and worked mostly on vocabulary and reading things like the Guatemalan Constitution and the parts that address the environment, learning about sanitation and water, municipality policies, talking about history, human rights, past and present, the war, the past. So lots of language around this. And she had all the vocabulary I needed. Then the second part of my sabbatical was the needs assessment of the environmental attorneys. So the first was arranging for contact and access. I had my letter of invitation from them, but arriving on the ground, if you look at my report, you'll find all the different cultural things. And it was like right around Christmas. And I'm used to things kind of petering out around the 20th or so of December, at least here, and then starting back up by the 3rd or so, January, not so in Guatemala. So my actual work got started much later. So part of that Escher painting was or drawing was my confusion and anxiety, which I knew where it was coming from, but I was still experiencing it. I did a survey of their language needs, reading, writing, listening, speaking. They just, as you know, what's your comfort level with this or that, and what kinds of tasks do you need to use these skills for? And then the last section here was the tasks throughout the entire time that I was working with the attorneys. And actually I work with them every week now over Zoom. I've continued every week. So I continue to gather more and more tasks, things that they need to do in English. All right. So, oops, yeah, you can't see. Can you see? Okay. So the day before I was about to meet the attorneys for the first time, I had met the executive director and we had been meeting, but to meet the group over Zoom, there was news about this human rights case that was won. And if you see the woman with the glasses, that's the president of Ada Dos. Her name's Alicia Shiloh, and she was part of winning this landmark human rights case. Her and another of the attorneys that I was working with. So imagine the day I read this, I was looking at all the news reports and I said, oh my God, these are my people. I could hardly sit down. I was so excited. And also, you know, like meeting a celebrity, like famous human rights attorneys. Okay, and then the local international community connection process. I'm not going to go into this deeply here. It's just making ties between LCC, ELA, Duolingo, the Luis von Ahn Foundation, which is the founder of Duolingo, his foundation, and another law organization called the Women's Justice Initiative that's also located in Guatemala, focused on women, especially Indigenous women's access to legal services and stopping sexual violence. Okay, let's get into my results and outcomes. So for my language learning, first of all, what is a good student? So this actually ties into a previous presentation here. What I found was that when what I was learning with my teacher was purposeful and contextualized vocabulary and grammar, but it's embedded within the Guatemalan Constitution or embedded within whatever we're talking about, I learned quickly, aptly, and I had retention, and I could use the language quick, like even a week later, it was there. But when my teacher brought in vocabulary that was random or not connected to any of my interests, I gotta say, I was not the good student, right? My brain wandered and I didn't have focus. So we know this, right? This is the way I teach anyway, but it just really drove home to me. This is the way I work with my students, but it really made me feel deeply how important that purpose is, embedding the teaching within context for languages. My teacher did find one thing that I was inconsistent with, which was the subjunctive. I've learned Spanish by ear and by working, not by studying. And I know the subjunctive in French, but learning it in figuring it out in Spanish, it's I'm inconsistent. So that was great for her to point that out to me. Oh, let's go on to the next. Needs and recommendations. These are the outcomes for the attorney, working with the attorneys and scientists. Oh, I did need to mention that the scientists and attorneys they all have almost all of them have other jobs. And then their network is Adados. They network together. One of the scientists works for the health ministry. 3 of the attorneys are human rights attorneys. 2 of them report to United Nations. 1 of them works for Amnesty International. So they all have other jobs. I divided the needs and recommendations, reading, writing, listening, speaking, the 4 language skills. I'm just going to give you a couple examples and then talk through a couple more if we have time. Here's just a writing example. I have I don't know if I can go to the link. What's going to happen if I go to the link? What do you think will happen? Is it okay? Okay.
You've got your sound shared, it'll work.
Okay, let's see what happens. So this is the director of the Adados. She has to prepare infographics. I'll just go and see what happens if it opens. Yeah. This one doesn't actually have the graphic, but it has the text. So this is the text. She works in groups of organizations that cover 4 countries: the Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, and Belize. And so Belize is English speaking, so they need to have everything bilingual. So what she does normally is she spits it through Google Translate and then sends that out to get checked. So that's inefficient and it costs them money. So what I did with her is I asked her to please do the translation herself, and then me and her could sit down and then I could categorize my recommendations for where she needed to focus. And what I found was she had really good vocabulary control, but she did not have good control of noun phrase boundaries and being able to pick up a noun phrase and move it around to different parts of the sentence. Passive voice sometimes threw her for a loop, and also the relationship between different grammar, different verb tenses also was tricky sometimes. So I was able to give 3 recommendations right there. These are things that if you work on these, you're going to have a lot more control when you do those translations by yourself, checking those translations. Okay, let me see. If I click here, is everybody back on my slides? Yes. Okay, here's another task. This is a speaking task example. This is Lucia, the president of the of Adados. So after she won that human rights case, she had a lot of journalists coming and interviewing her. Her English is really good. However, she has such a giant brain and so many ideas in it that she zooms through everything. And she doesn't Spanish as well as in English, but with the some of the pronunciation things on top, it made it a little bit tricky to understand. So after she won this case, she had to prepare an interview. She was going to be interviewed by the Swiss embassy, and she wanted to practice before she went, summarizing the case. So we worked on summarizing efficiently and with really good delivery. And so the delivery includes keyword emphasis, syllable stress, pauses, clear pronunciation of peak, idea, vowel sounds. So peak, oops, I spelled peak wrong. That's peak. Peak, like top sounds. Those are things, even if some of the other pronunciation is not clear, if those things are clear, the delivery and the impact is much stronger. So this is just a little screenshot of some of the things that I was working with her on. Other types of tasks were things like reading. So they received emails from colleagues from around the world. Those are low stakes. They can understand most of it. It's fine. But high stakes, grant proposal, they need to understand that question really carefully, because sometimes there's nuances in those questions. And if you start writing in one direction, you think you got it, and you end up going off in a different direction. So helping them really narrow down that reading focus when they need to. Listening. They go to international conferences, and they want to ask questions after presentations. And so there's a speaking and listening component, but they really need to understand carefully in order to make that question. After networking in with other colleagues from around the world in English. So what I've heard is that some of them will stick all with their Spanish speaking expert colleagues from around the world, but not go talk with other people. So that was another thing. So I work with them on expert discussion practice, some networking things. Okay, so towards the end, well, when we first started, Jeanette, the executive director, wanted us to meet in person. They had not met in person for 2 years because of COVID. And so we set up a meeting time, but it kept getting changed for people's schedules. And also the Guatemalan government put some restrictions while I was there. Finally, the last Saturday before I came back, we decided to put a theme to our meeting, and it was called the Ada Dos International English Conference. And so at this conference, I presented some of my recommendations with some practice in the morning, and in the afternoon, each person made a presentation in English about a project that they wanted their organization to work on that was connected to the organization's mission. So let me just quickly click into here. So this is the little agenda. So I'll just show you some of so they're the presentations there. They had, those are the topics for their presentations. And after each presentation, they had expert discussion practice, which was very fun. And they rented a conference room in a hotel with a garden area, so that it was like COVID safe. All right. Oh, I have a few pictures from the conference. This is Jeanette. Sorry, it's kind of dark. She was advocating for English as her organization needs English as part of its infrastructure. This is Mara. She's a human rights attorney. She presented over Zoom. Her presentation was about teaching judges about environmental law and coaching those judges to teach other judges. This is Estuardo. He was talking about broadening their organizational base for survival of their organization. And this is Ever. He works for the health ministry. He talked about municipal water policy. This is Lucia doing expert discussion. She got real fired up about Estuardo's presentation. Estuardo wanted to start selling their services, but they're an NGO. And this is Lucia and Jeanette presenting some vocabulary root word activities that we did in the morning to the group. All right, so I showed you day 1. This is me at day 90. And this is my life purpose at this point, is working with these attorneys to help with address climate change. Significance. So deep and lasting learning has to include purpose that's embedded in context, and it's for language learning and for any other learning. Oops, it looks like it's the end of time. I'm just going to not read these then. I do want to say the development of targeted English for specific purposes, not just blanket law, but English for environmental law, these types of things, I think are going to be really useful to maximize people's time, because these attorneys have jobs, and they don't have time to go and study at a 6-month program or take an online course that requires them to be, putting a lot of time in. Duolingo is great, but it's very general vocabulary and kind of random. So this is a future moving towards the future of the discipline. I'd like to express my gratitude to Adados, ILA, the LCC Professional Development Sabbatical Committee, LCCEA, and the college, and my dad and stepmom for providing the frequent flyer miles so I could get to Guatemala. And thank you for listening. Questions or comments? Thank you. I want to do it again. Actually, yesterday I was WhatsApping with Jeanette, and she's looking for funding to do another conference, like to pay me. It's like, I don't need any money, but they want to do more. They want to do more, whether it's, funding for them or the hotels or whatever. So through USAID. So I hope that there's future for this.